This is a monitor?
Yeah, that was, we usually can see, we can't really see it from here.
All right.
Ah, there you go. Better check,
go.
Michelle, okay, you okay with that?
There you go. Nice. Thanks, Dan.
Good work, Dan.
Okay. Ready to roll. We're good?
So short.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is a meeting of the Tinton Falls Borough Council being held February 1st, 2022. This meeting is hereby called to order. Would the clerk please read the open public meeting statement?
Pursuant to Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by posting on the bulletin board at Borough Hall and by notification to the Asbury Park Press, the Newark Star Ledger, and the New Coaster at least 48 hours prior to the meeting.
Thank you. May I ask the clerk to call the roll, please?
Mrs. Clay?
Here.
Dr. Dobrin?
Here.
Mr. Manginelli?
Yes.
Mr. Nessie?
Here.
Ms. Buckley?
Here. At this time, I'd like to invite everyone to join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There are 4 sets of meeting minutes for approval this evening. May I have a motion to approve the November 9th, 2021 regular meeting minutes and executive session minutes, and the December 7th, 2021 regular meeting minutes?
Motion.
Thank you. Thank you. May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Clay?
Yes.
Dr. Dobrin?
Abstain.
Mr. Manginelli?
Yes.
Mr. Nessie?
Yes.
Ms. Buckley?
Yes. May I have a motion to approve the December 7th, 2021 executive session minutes?
Motion.
Thank you. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Clay?
Yes.
Dr. Dobrin?
Abstain.
Mr. Manginelli?
Abstain.
Mr. Nessie?
Abstain.
Did
Yeah, one of you guys was here, because
Mr. Manginelli was here.
Mr. Manginelli, you were here that evening.
That's correct.
Okay. So can we take a roll call? Can we do the roll call again?
Absolutely. Ms. Clay?
Yes.
Dr. Dobrin?
Abstain.
Mr. Manginelli?
Yes.
Ms. Nessie? Mr.
Just to
Nessie?
clarify, Mr. Manginelli, is that a yes?
No, abstain.
We do need 3 votes for this, and I believe you were there that evening?
On December 7th?
Yeah.
You can actually approve it by a majority
Oh,
of
yes.
those eligible to vote, so,
Yes.
oh, okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Starkey. Thank you, Mr. Manginelli.
Mr. Nessie?
Abstain.
Ms. Buckley?
Yes. Okay. That brings us to reports, and we will start with Mr. Neff, our Borough Engineer.
Thank you, Council President. I just wanted to mention under the consent agenda, we have Resolution R22-050. This is a resolution to award a contract for electrical work at Hoxton Park. We are utilizing a co-op, which is similar to state contract. So this is the Sourcewell co-op, and allows us to award the contract without going out for public bids. So it saves some time and money. So this is to replace all of the field lighting at field number 3. These were the ones that were removed last year. One of them had fallen down during a storm, and the others, majority of them were deemed unsafe. So those were removed as a safety precaution. And now that we're into 2022, the borough has sufficient funds, it's my understanding. So this will be to replace all the lights at Field 3. And then we're also going to be upgrading the controls for the overall park. So it'll be Fields 3, 2, and 1, and it'll allow for wireless controls. So the rec director or DPW director can control the lights from their phones. This will save some energy as well, and the residents, I think, will appreciate lights not being left on overnight. And it also includes a new lightning detection system at the park. So that's something that's going to be mounted onto the building there. And it's not just a lightning rod, it actually detects the ions in the air from many miles away, and it gives an advanced warning. So it's something new that we're doing. We're going to be doing it at all the major parks.
That's awesome.
So that's all I have right now.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Neff. Mr. Fallon, our CFO and acting BA.
Thank you, Council President. Good evening. Just really a couple things. I'd like to congratulate Chief Scrivnick on his retirement.
Sorry, excuse me, if you could just keep your voice down.
Yeah, I've worked very closely with the chief over the last couple of years, and I congratulate him and certainly wish him the best and best on his retirement and his future endeavors. And also, we had 3 other officers retire: Captain Scrivnick, as well as Lieutenant Stevens and Lieutenant McIntaggart. So I'd like to wish them the best as well, and certainly welcome our new police chief who was sworn in today, Michael DeLucia. I look forward to working with him in the future, for sure. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Fallon. Mayor Perillo, if you have a report this evening.
Yes, I just want to thank the council and my borough attorney and Mr. Fallon, Mr. Neff, for the past year, the good year we had, and I hope that it continues in the new year. That's all I have.
Thank you. Mr. Starkey, our Director of Law.
I don't have any report, but I did want to echo Mr. Fallon's comments. The Chief Scrivnick was a pleasure to work with, did a great job here. And I welcome the new chief and wish the best to the officers who are retiring. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Starkey. Ms. Hutchinson, our new borough clerk. Welcome.
Thank you. I have no report for tonight.
All right, thank you. Now we'll move on to council reports, and we'll start with Mrs. Clay.
Thank you, Council President. Last week, I attended a Board of Education meeting. It was a short meeting. I do want to mention that the administration of the K-8 district, the superintendent, Dr. Goldie, she sends out daily reports, and I wanted to say that she's doing an excellent job communicating and managing the COVID situation in the schools. And I think she's to be commended for that. Also, I wanted to thank our DPW, OEM, our Tinton Falls Fire Companies, and our police department for the excellent job that they did managing the storm. I'd like to echo congratulations for Chief Scrivnick, Captain Scrivnick, Lieutenant Stevens, and Lieutenant McIntaggart, and I wish them well in their retirement and thank them for their service. And I'm also looking forward to working with Captain DeLucia. And lastly, on our agenda this evening, there's a proclamation for Black History Month. And I'm really excited that we're recognizing Black History Month. And I just wanted to say that in addition to Black History Month celebrating the history of African Americans, it's also important because it helps us remember the dangers of racial oppression and injustice. And it's an opportunity for us to reflect on the importance of human rights and the inclusion of Black history into American history. And it's by knowing and learning about others that we continue to grow and learn from one another. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mrs. Clay. Dr. Darbin, for your report this evening.
No, I don't have a report, but I would like to just echo again everybody's congratulations to our new chief of police And of course, congratulations to John Skrivensic for being such a wonderful chief of police for this town of Tinton Falls. That's about it. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Dr. Dobrin. Mr. Manginelli, for your report this evening.
No report, but echoing praise on Chief Scrivener and the other three officers. Combined, they represented over 100 years of service to Tinton Falls, and I really certainly appreciate that, and I'm sure we all do, and I wish them all nothing but luck and good fortune. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manginelli. Mr. Nessie, for your report this evening.
Thank you. Last week's planning board meeting, the planning board approved a preliminary and final major site plan for an application for suburban disposal on Asbury Avenue. The applicant complied with almost every request from the planning board members and its professionals, and I think they'll make a great fit here for Tinton Falls. The Chicken Advisory Board meeting dates will soon be available on the committee page on the borough website. Our first meeting will be in 2 weeks from tomorrow on February 16th at 7 p.m. downstairs in the meeting room A. We're excited, and it'll be fun. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Nessie. Finally, for my report, I don't have Environmental Commission report for this meeting, but I want to echo congratulations and thanks first to the DPW, OEM, fire department, fire companies, and fire department for the excellent job removing the snow. Quite a lot of it over this past weekend. I also want to piggyback and echo congratulations on the retirements of the 3 officers, as well as outgoing Chief Scrivanek, and thank them for their combined years of service, as well as congratulate and welcome Chief DeLucia, whose swearing in was this afternoon. And it's wonderful, and welcome aboard. Best of luck to him. And that is all. I also wanted to recognize Black History Month as well. That's, I believe, the first resolution we have on our consent agenda this evening. Mrs. Clay said everything. And that's all for my report. So we'll move on to ordinances for introduction. There are 2 ordinances on for introduction this evening. I'd like to remind the public that when an ordinance is introduced, there's no public discussion. The public discussion for the following ordinance will take place when it's up for final consideration. With that, may I ask the clerk to read the title of the first ordinance?
Ordinance number 2022-1482, an ordinance amending section 2-12.1 G3 of the Borough Code governing off-duty rates for the police department. The public hearing for this ordinance will be held on February 15, 2022.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the introduction of this ordinance?
Motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Nessie, and Mr. Manginelli for the second. May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Clay?
Yes.
Dr. Dobrin?
Yes.
Mr. Manginelli?
Yes.
Mr. Nessie?
Yes.
Ms. Buckley?
Yes. Thank you. May I ask the clerk to read the title of the next ordinance?
Ordinance number 2022-1483, an ordinance setting salaries for department heads, statutory employees, mayor, and council. The public hearing for this ordinance will be held on February 15, 2022.
Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the introduction of this ordinance?
Motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Motion by Mrs. Clay, second Dr. Dobrin. Thank you. May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Clay?
Yes.
Dr. Dobrin?
Yes.
Mr. Manginelli?
Yes.
Mr. Nessie?
Yes.
Ms. Buckley?
Yes. Thank you. There are no ordinances for final consideration this evening. That brings us to the open public discussion. May I have a motion to open the public discussion?
Motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Nessie and Mr. Manginelli. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. This is the time the public may comment on any topic of their choice. Please state your name and address for the record and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Is there any member of the public that would like to make a comment this evening? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Rosemary Kochman. I live at 38 Knollwood Drive in Tinton Falls, and I am the current president of the Board of Trustees of the Tinton Falls Public Library.
Good evening.
The reason why I'm here today is because we have a lot of people to thank for the matching grant that we received from from New Jersey Library Association. As most people, or many people know, a couple of months ago, we received a matching grant of $217,500. Since it's a matching grant, the borough has putting in some money, and the library is also, the association is also contributing money. So the amount that we will have is approximately $435,000 to remediate the library and to make improvements to it. This couldn't have happened without the help of the following people. And I'm going to feel like it's the Oscars where I'm thanking everybody. So if anybody has a piano, you can tell me to leave. First of all, I'd like to thank Mayor Petrillo for his support through these years. We've been closed since 2017. I also want to thank very much Tom Fallon and Tom Neff for their work in not only evaluating what was wrong with the library, but also shepherding us through the matching grant application. The first matching grant application, we did not get anything. But at the second round, last year, we got the money. I want to thank the previous Borough Council for voting for us for the giving us the money, voting for giving us the money to match the grant. And I'd especially like to thank Nancy Ann Fama and Brock Siebert, who were our liaisons and who were very supportive and very vocal in getting the library opened again. I also want to thank the current Borough Council for their support, their encouragement, and for supporting our fundraisers. I want to thank Senator Vin Gopal because he shepherded through and was adamant about shepherding it through the legislature of the Assembly. I also want to thank the Monmouth County Library System. They were instrumental in helping us transfer over when our library closed so that our patrons could return the books. They forgave our fines and allowed us to take out books with our Tinton Falls Library card. They also have told me in an email from Heidi Amici, who is our liaison, that when the library opens, not if, when the library opens, they will be there to give us new books and will give us computers. They will help us with the staff as far as when we hire staff or even the volunteers, how to process books and how to set things up as they've done before. I would also like to thank, most importantly, and I think this should be in the record, are our supporters, the residents of Tinton Falls who supported our music festival in large numbers and also supported our children's fashion show. We have had many, many encouraging emails from many different people, and we have also had people who have been donating money to our cause. Now, we can't stop fundraising because the matching grant only allows for us to remediate and fix the library. It does not go towards operating costs. It does not go for future salaries for our staff. It only goes to fixing the library. So we must continue to fundraise, and we will be starting in April with our children's fashion show, and hopefully during the summer we will have our third music festival. So anybody who wants to find out information, they can go on the TintonFallsLibrary.com website. And I did receive the other day from the grant commission, we have paperwork that we have to fill out in order to get the grant. We do not have a timetable as to when that money will come into the borough. We have no idea. I was speaking to Heidi Amici the other day, and she told me it took them almost 5 to 6 months before they got their money for the first round. And as everybody here knows, costs have gone up from 2017 to 2022. So Even though we have this money, we have no idea what the labor and materials will cost. We've taken a giant step forward, but we have a long way to go. But I didn't want to wait any longer, as I said, to make sure that people here in the room and whoever reads the minutes knows that we are very, very grateful. I have been a member of the library, a patron, since 1975. I have been a volunteer since 1976, and I have been president through many years on and off. And I'm now in my 8th year as president. And the library, the Tinton Falls Public Library, is very, very close to my heart. And in many cases, it may be my only hobby. So again, I want to thank everybody. We are very, very grateful. And we hope that if you can't come to the children's fashion show, that you will come to our music festival in the summer. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but
I do.
yes.
One of the things I heard when I attended one of the meetings that I thought was a great idea for fundraising is purchasing a brick which would be inscribed with the donor's name. How is that going?
We stopped it because we have, I'm not sure of the amount, but we have sold a number of bricks in the beginning, but we had to stop it. We haven't done anything aggressively because we didn't know when we were opening. We didn't know if we'd get the grant to open. So it's another fundraiser that will be coming back now that we know that the library will open. The other thing is we can't do anything until all the work is done. And then the bricks will be laid at the current library. If in the future, maybe when I'm not here anymore, and the library does get another building, these bricks can be taken up and taken wherever it goes.
Okay.
But it will be we will be starting it up again.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay? Thank you.
Thanks.
Is there any other member of the public that has a comment? Michelle, were there any written comments received?
No, I did not receive any.
All right, thank you. Hearing no further comments, may I have a motion to close the public discussion?
Motion.
Thank you, Mr. Dobrin. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Manginelli. All in favor?
Aye.
Miscellaneous business. Does any member of council have anything to add that they didn't cover during reports? Okay. Moving on to resolutions. First, we have a resolution for the appointment of the Director of the Department of Administration and Public Safety. May I ask the clerk to read the title of the resolution?
Resolution R22-046, resolution consenting to appointment of the Director of the Department of Administration and Director of Public Safety.
Thank you. May I have a motion to adopt the resolution?
Motion.
Mr. Manginelli, motion, and a second?
Second.
Okay. I heard Mrs. Clay. Okay. May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Clay?
Yes.
Dr. Dobrin?
Yes.
Mr. Manginelli?
Yes.
Mr. Nessie?
Yes.
Ms. Buckley?
My vote is no, but for context, it has nothing to do with Mr. Tarafenko specifically. It's more around the process. I would have liked to have seen the full council included in the process during the interview process. Also, just for any members of the public that may be listening, it's okay that not all council members vote the same all the time. It's not typical that it always happens. So, we're all doing our jobs. So my vote is evidence of that. Finally, I wanted to state that I will work collaboratively and enthusiastically with Mr. Tarafenko to ensure his success in this role, as the success of the BA is the success of the borough. Thank you very much. Next, we will move on to the consent agenda. Before we do, are there any items any member of the council would like to be removed from the consent agenda to be voted on separately? Okay, seeing none. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Clay. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Nessie. May I have a roll call, please?
Mrs. Clay?
Yes.
Dr. Dobrin?
Yes.
Mr. Manginelli?
Yes.
Mr. Nessie?
Yes.
Ms. Buckley?
Yes, thank you. Okay. At this time, we will move on to our workshop meeting. May I have a motion to adjourn the regular meeting and open the workshop?
Motion.
Thank you, Mr.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Nessie for the first and Mr. Manginelli for the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. This workshop meeting is hereby called to order. Would the clerk please read the open public meeting statement?
Pursuant to Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by posting on the bulletin board at Borough Hall, posting on the Borough website and Facebook page, and by notification to the Asbury Park Press, the Newark Star Ledger, and the New Coaster at least 48 hours prior to the meeting.
Thank you. May I ask the clerk to call the roll, please?
Mrs. Clay?
Yes.
Dr. Dobrin?
Here.
Mr. Manginelli?
Yes.
Mr. Nessie?
Yes.
Ms. Buckley?
Yes, thank you. This workshop is being held to discuss two items, the 5G ordinance, potential ordinance, as well as an electric vehicle station ordinance. No formal action will be taken. We'll aim to keep this to an hour as a general note, and if we need further discussion, we can always carry it to a future workshop. If time allows at the end, we'll have public comment. There is no unfinished business to be discussed this evening, so that brings us to new business. And we're going to start with the 5G ordinance, and I believe Mr. Starkey is going to give an intro.
Yeah, I'll start with the discussion, and I know Tom Neff is going to chime in. I'll try to give you an overview of where this is leading. This is leading towards an ordinance to be presented by the council. 5G refers to the 5th generation of cellular coverage. Right now we're in 4G, but we're moving towards 5G, which is a system implemented by the major wireless services like Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint. The primary difference between the 4G and the 5G is that the idea behind 5G is that there's going to be more comprehensive coverage, cellular coverage in the country and in the county and in Tinton Falls. And the way that's being accomplished is instead of relying on the prior technology, sort of these large-scale antennas to try to have a greater reach, the telecommunications companies are using smaller antennas. And by smaller, these are generally up to 3 cubic feet in size. So if you imagine it's maybe 24 inches by 12 inches by 12 inches roughly. And they're going to be more of these throughout the borough, and they need to be more visible, I'd say, more accessible, so they have a clearer lines of sight. There is an advantage, by the way. There's obviously an advantage to the telecommunications companies by giving better coverage. There's also an advantage to users, better coverage, to people like law enforcement, where they might get, like the reports are that 911 calls, for example, you can identify to be within several feet of where the call is made from. So there are benefits on both sides to having better coverage. These antennas, these sort of 3 cubic feet of antennas, are generally sited, they're placed on poles. A lot of times existing telephone poles, sometimes new poles. A municipality, and this is a rule throughout the country by the federal government, municipalities cannot say no to 5G antennas. And that's because the Federal Communications Commission decided back in September of 2018 that it's something that the country as a whole is going to promote, the federal government is going to promote. And by them doing that, the FCC adopting regulations, they do what they call preempt the field, which means their regulations supersede and override any state laws and any local laws to the contrary. So if we said, we don't want these antennas, it simply wouldn't work because federal law allows the companies to come in and place them in Tinton Falls. What we can do is try to manage the process. And by manage, I mean we can require everyone to come in. This is what the ordinance that you're going to adopt is going to do. And by the way, there's a model ordinance that's recommended by the League of Municipalities, and then there are some variations on that for municipalities. And Many municipalities have already adopted these, others are considering it, and I'm sure there's more to come. The reason we want one is there's several reasons. One is, generally speaking, municipalities want to try to direct these telecommunications companies to place their antennas on existing poles, usually the telephone poles. If there are not existing poles available, and we can make that a preference, then the telecommunications companies can propose a new pole. And we can require them, if it's a new pole, to have a certain kind of pole. We can regulate, to some extent, the location of it, and we can require them to allow at least 3 antennas on each pole, so we don't have, single poles popping up all over the place. So that's one advantage. We also can require them to file an application that would be reviewed primarily by Mr. Neff, by our professionals. We can require the provider to pay us a fee, an application fee for starters. Most towns are in the $500 range for that. And escrow fees, and those range from $2,000 up to around $7,500. And that's to pay for our professionals to review what's submitted to us in terms of, they have to put in, just like any other structure, how it's going to be supported, how much it's going to weigh, where it's going to be located, what the radio frequency is going to be, why it's needed in this particular location. That's something if we have a proper ordinance, we can require them to submit and we can review. We also have to comply with what the FCC calls a shot clock, which means we need to respond fairly quickly when an application is submitted. And these applications sometimes can come in batches. They could submit an application for up to 25 antennas at a time. We have, every municipality has 60 days to review and approve, disapprove each application if it's on an existing pole, and 90 days if it proposes a new pole. If we don't comply within that time frame, or it's not agreeable to extend it, they probably are going to have automatic approval, or at least it'll put us into litigation. So we want to set up procedures so that we know where the application is going to be filed, who's going to get it, who's going to review it, that there's money placed, given to us to review it, so that we can comply with those guidelines, but do it in an orderly fashion from our end. We're also proposing, and when I say we're proposing, this is sort of a work in progress, but Tom Neff's done a great job putting together a model ordinance based on other towns. But we're having what's called a right-of-way agreement. I've seen most towns have this. I think it's a good idea. It's an agreement between the town and the cellular provider as to specifically where poles are going to be located, what the height is going to be, who's going to be obligated for maintenance, and how long that pole is going to be allowed to be there. Right now, we're proposing a 15-year term for these agreements, and those would come to the council. I think they come to the council, most of them do, for approval before they become effective. So Tom and I are working in the process of trying to, gather everything we can to get it into a comprehensive ordinance that will be presented to you as the council for your consideration and at some point an approval, so we can try to manage this process, because it's coming and we need to deal with it in an orderly way as best we can.
I have a couple of questions, so
I'm sure.
I'll start. If we don't do anything, that just means the carriers get free rein, right? So it's in our best interest to adopt an ordinance. Okay.
Generally, yes.
Couple questions as I was noting that down. Okay. So it would be, because of the fee application and escrow, essentially the way we'd be structuring it is so that there'd be no cost to the borough.
Correct.
That would be the ideal. Okay. When you say that the shot clock for the applications, and then you said that a cellular provider can put up to 25 or 3 antennas on a pole and up to 25 applications at once, would we have to approve each application at a time, or is it like if Verizon put in for 25, is it one approval for 25 or 25 individual approvals?
It is the first one. It is considered one application. We have a total of 60 days. If they're on an existing pole, that many would probably be on a mix of existing and new, so we'd have 90 days, but that would be one review of one application within that time frame.
And does the council need to do a resolution for each one of those application approvals?
No.
Or is it the professionals?
Well, each one's out, no, if Verizon came in and said, we have 10 antennas we want to put up, we would have an agreement, one agreement, that would include those 10 antennas in it.
Well,
So is there a difference between the approving the application and the right-of-way agreement, which I think you said has to come to the council?
It is part of the same application process. The application is what Verizon, for example, would present to the town as their proposal. The approval would be, there's probably two parts of it. One is coming from, the professionals, like a sign off on this is good or it's not. And part of that is the approval by the council of the right-of-way agreement.
Okay. And the right-of-way
So-
agreement you're proposing would be for 15 years?
Correct.
Okay. Do you have a question, Mr. Mangino?
yeah, I see a proliferation of poles in Tinton Falls. And so, I gathered the size of the pole and the material of the pole hasn't been defined yet, or is that left up to the municipality?
We're defining that in our proposed ordinance, but I believe, Tom, is that the FCC limits that? I think the FCC might set that. Is it 35 feet?
I was going to say 35 stands out in my head too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's FCC requirement.
35 poles?
No, 35 feet is
in
what
height.
like a typical
Oh.
utility pole is.
And you said
But-
each pole can have up to 3 antennas?
No, we would require that. In other words, we say to them, if you're going to build a new pole, Verizon builds a new pole and they put one antenna on it, they have to allow at least 2 other antennas. AT&T comes in and they want the same coverage, they're going to be allowed to locate on that pole.
This way
3
we
on
don't-
a pole,
Uh,
then. 3 on a pole.
Correct.
This way we don't have Verizon at your house on a pole and then AT&T right next to your house at your neighbor's on another pole. And part of the reason we want to get it as essentially a permit application, it's going to be treated kind of like a zoning permit, where they have to submit their plans and show the location because, say there aren't any poles on your street and maybe it's all underground and they just say, oh, I want to put it right at this location, it happens to be smack dab in the middle of your property, when maybe there's a nice row of trees between your property and your neighbor's property, and they can put it on the property line instead of right in front of your front door or something, so to speak. We want to be able to review where they're putting them and guide them as much as we can, at least. If there's a better location in the general vicinity, that might be better.
So just for clarity, this would have to be placed on like a borough's easement or on individuals' property?
It would be within the borough right-of-way. So as a reminder, you have the paved road and usually curb, but not always. So that's the roadway, and then usually the right-of-way is about 5 to 10 feet outside of the paved road.
Okay.
So people's property doesn't come to the road, that's the borough's right-of-way, like I said, usually 5 to 10 feet on either side where the existing poles are.
So I think the natural question would be then, if I'm a homeowner and it's going to be, can we make it that they have to notice the individual, similar to a zoning application, you need to notice people
I
within X amount
have
of
seen
feet?
that in some towns. Not all towns require that. Some towns do require that the applicant, in this case Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, whoever it may be, would have to provide proof of notification to the residents. If that's something council wants, we can include that.
Yeah, I've seen the same thing and it's usual within a 200-foot radius of the location of a new pole.
Yeah.
Can a municipality determine the maximum number of poles they want in their municipality?
No. The municipality, but we can require the telecommunications companies to submit evidence of why additional poles are needed, but we can't dictate to them exactly where they have to be located, subject to what Tom said, within a range. We can't say they have to be here or there, and they're limited to, 20 or 50 or 100. It's, the FCC allows them as needed in the determination of telecommunications companies as evidenced by their application submission where they're located.
Because as you were giving your presentation, Kevin,
Yeah.
having been born and raised in Brooklyn, I remember the proliferation of television antennas, which made it look like a horrible place. I mean, by the end of the 50s, you could look, there were just television antennas all over the place.
Right.
So I envisioned that with poles, and there's got to be some limit on,
Well, how do we encourage them to use existing poles that might be more enticing instead of putting poles where they want to?
We're going to require them to, when they submit their application, to demonstrate that there is not, in the area where they're looking at, that there's not an existing available pole for them to use for antenna before they can install a new pole.
What would even be the benefit to a telecommunications carrier for adding more poles? Because to me, more poles means more problems and more service they would have to perform on it. It's not like the borough's performing service on it, right? They are.
That's what I was going to say. I think if there's an existing pole that's owned by, typically they're owned by Verizon or AT&T or JCP&L, that they would want to piggyback on that existing pole. The new poles would really just be in cases where there aren't typical amount of existing utility poles. Or if there's some of the newer developments have underground utilities, they have underground electric, underground cable. In those cases, that's really where I envision new poles coming. If your street has existing wood poles and overhead utility lines, they're most likely, I believe, going to go on those existing poles,
Would that need to be an agreement? The pole's owned by JCP&L, right?
typically.
Would that need to be an agreement between JCP&L and the carrier, or do we need to get involved in it?
You know, they would work out that agreement, I believe, yes.
right? So the landlord of the pole becomes the one who installed it, and then other carriers that become tenants to that pole. Is
Yes,
that-
it's similar to in the back
Yeah.
of Borough Hall, DPW, we have the typical cell tower. And, I forget who went in first, but say it was T-Mobile who built the tower, and they were the first ones on there. We had a requirement that your tower has to be able to support at least one or two other carriers such as Verizon, even though they were the ones who built it, and now Verizon just comes in and puts their antennas on someone else's pole.
Right.
Because we don't want multiple poles all over.
And the material of the pole hasn't been specified?
For
Is
new
it
pole,
wood, is it aluminum, is it?
We're still working that out. That's one of the things we have to look at, but it would be something that blends in with the area. If the area has all wood poles, I would think that
Okay.
they would do wood. If it's, like I said, sometimes if it's an underground utility neighborhood, they usually have the aluminum or fiberglass streetlights. So it would be something that
Okay.
should blend in.
When
Right.
you,
I was just going to ask that, if you can use streetlights or,
I don't believe they can use we call them like the colonial post op or the acorn
Right.
tops, where it's the street lights that are mounted to the ground, not on a pole. I don't think they can go on those.
Not strong,
They're
yeah.
usually a little bit shorter.
But
when you discuss the proof of notification, is that to the resident, Kevin?
if you require it, it's to all of owners of property within 200 feet of the proposed
Okay.
location.
And suppose the people, the residents of a particular place are not happy with that
They
location?
they can certainly voice their concerns, that's the point of it.
Mhm.
We are still constrained by federal law, so if they say, we don't want that, what we would do is explore alternatives, other, Tom says, other places that can be cited, so it would not bring the same, interference or problems. But we are limited in how much we can decide that, but the residents' input is certainly welcome in that process.
I still think, my own personal opinion is.
can
I do-
existing towers be used, cell towers be used?
I don't believe so. I
Uh-huh.
don't think there's any harm in it, but it's a different type of product. I
Okay.
think they're already using the cell towers. This is more to do like kind of hyper-local
Okay,
levels to fill in the dead spots. And then also, it's just a new technology where in order to get those 5G speeds, I think they just need more frequent antennas. And there
Okay,
will be
what-
some, I just want to make sure everyone's clear. So we're talking about the antenna on the pole, which, like Kevin said, is typically, I think we're going to specify 3 cubic feet. I saw a couple other towns that said 6 cubic feet, but most are going with 3, so I'd recommend that. There are some cases where they may need an equipment cabinet on the ground as well. So we'd be setting size limits for those somewhere around 15 cubic feet, kind of like an electric cabinet that you might see in a neighborhood that has underground.
So that would go
electric.
with the pole?
Yes.
Is that?
I don't believe it's every pole, but it's
Okay.
in certain instances, they will need a,
Yeah, because I
Ground.
saw that one, the one you directed me to, there's one, when you're coming out of the Grove Mall and you make a left, it looks like a normal Monmouth County, like, traffic turn
Yeah.
thing, but it's actually that pole.
So, well, we answered pretty quickly when Council President asked if it's gonna cost the municipality, and the answer is no. But what about the resource to investigate all this stuff? Who's gonna be doing that? Reviewing the plans, and who's gonna be doing that?
so, right now it's most likely going through zoning department, so I would be involved in that. And then they would submit an application fee, which would go towards salaries, whether it's myself or someone else, if Carrie Costa gets involved, or any of the other borough employees. And then for the more detailed applications, when we get in these large bunches, there is an escrow requirement. There could be an escrow requirement for any application regardless of the size. And that goes to cover if we need like a full-blown engineering review on it.
So basically, when setting the escrow amount, we would want to choose, you would kind of do an analysis, what you think it would typically cost for all the professionals. to do
Yes,
it
and
with that
and it can
amount.
be reasonable. So, in other words, if for some reason there's an extensive application and that is not sufficient, we can request and require additional deposits into escrow to cover
Well,
the
escrow
cost.
amount to me implies that it's something that's gonna be returned.
So the way because I deal with them all the time for planning and zoning board reviews, yeah, so the escrow account, you're right. Essentially the professionals use whatever's needed, so if they post 5,000 and they only need 4,000, once the work is complete and the job is finished, the remaining $1,000 would get returned to the holder.
It's
So
not
who
like we
sets
do
the escrow
reimbursement.
amount?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Who sets the escrow amount?
That would be set in the ordinance as a minimum. We would set the minimum that's required to be submitted with every application. And in the event they submit an overly large one and we run out of the escrow, we would simply ask for more.
I thought,
Okay.
Mr. Bucky, you said that the borough will get paid for reviewing all this stuff.
The borough gets, I wouldn't say paid, borough gets reimbursed, our costs are covered. So, for example, if somebody from Tom Ness Firm spends 10 hours in review and that costs the borough, $1,500, that is paid by the applicant, not by the borough. That cost is paid.
Okay.
What's been your experience, Mr. Neff, and the other towns about the ordinance that they use?
So there was a couple,
I was gonna say, if we do nothing, my question would be, we do nothing, can they put a 5G thing up on our roof?
not on the roof, but in front of your house in your street, yes.
Wherever they want.
Okay.
Yeah, so we had thought, so some towns adopted an ordinance a couple years ago even. I think it said 2018 is when it initially came out. So some towns got on it right away adopting ordinances. Tinton Falls took the stance that we just weren't going to approve anything, which was fine because we hadn't really gotten that mandate yet from the federal and state level. We were able to just push it off as long as we could. And then we had hoped that the state was going to control this a little bit more. We thought that there was some bills that were up for approval. And then just a couple weeks ago, they got pushed off, and it seems like they're not going to go through. So that's why now it's back on the local level to set this ordinance. And if we don't, they can essentially put it anywhere in the public.
Because
right of
basically,
way.
I guess it's passed at the federal level, so like currently tomorrow, they could do whatever they want until we put this ordinance in place.
I mean, I think they still need borough approval. I think they had been requesting, originally they wanted like a blanket resolution of approval, and that's what we were holding back. So I think,
Okay.
they still need some borough approval, but we want to have the ordinance that sets the specifics.
Okay.
If the pole is installed on municipal land, what is the fee for what does the borough get for that?
Are you saying like a park, say?
Yeah,
I don't believe they're looking to go into any properties. I think it's really going to be more just along street right-of-ways.
Yeah, this ordinance pertains specifically to public rights-of-way, as Tom described, the sides of the roadways, not to, municipal property or municipal-owned land.
oh, you don't see that, because asking to have a pole built here on the grounds here on,
So I think it would. The focus has been primarily on rights-of-way, existing telephone poles. I mean, they want to be out in the town, not, before it was, we'll come to your municipal property and we'll build a tower.
right, that's
Right,
right.
and that was the comment. That's not the direction that this has
Okay.
got, the communication, the technology's going in now.
But if I could just follow along that line of thought, so for example, Sycamore Avenue, right, so you've got all along their poles, then there's the portion of the road that goes past Sycamore Park, which is borough property, right, so they could theoretically want one along there, which would be the right-of-way, but it's on borough property, so would this ordinance cover that as well? Because it's still a public right-of-way?
Yeah, yes, it's the sides of certainly any municipal roadway, and we've had a discussion about this, and rights-of-way is municipal roadway, county roadway, state highway. This would apply definitely to municipal roadways, to the rights-of-way. I believe it also applies to county roadways, although we probably wouldn't have a formal right-of-way agreement because it's on a county roadway, but we do have the right to review and approve those. So whether the right-of-way is on municipally owned property, county owned property, it would be the same as if it's residential, commercial, industrial property.
For instance, on a Garden State Parkway or the Jersey Turnpike, would they install poles there?
So,
I don't know. I don't want to give you a wrong answer. I don't know.
And what is the size, so the pole is 35 feet, and what about the size of the antenna itself? What is that? How big is that, Tom?
It's 3 cubic feet. The estimates I've seen used generally are 24 inches by 12 inches by maybe 8 to 12 inches.
Oh, rather large.
3 cubic feet. Yeah, that's
Wow.
maybe the size, I'm thinking the size of like a cooler, that you take out on your,
And we could put 3 of those on a pole.
on a new pole.
Yep.
That's correct. Yes, we would require that for a new one.
We got 300 miles of road, and every 500 feet there's a pole. So, as far as needing poles,
Sounds like it's not gonna be a good-looking thing, that's for sure.
That's why I want to encourage using existing poles opposed
Yeah.
to putting new poles. And is there a way to put a different fee or whatever for, putting a new pole in versus using existing?
Absolutely, yes. Obviously, it would typically require more of a review, more detail with a new pole, so we would require a higher escrow fee. I don't know if the application fee was higher, but certainly escrow fee. For example, it might be $5,000 for an existing pole, $7,500 for a new pole, and that could go up for a new pole. But to answer your question, the mayor's question, the good news is that there is generally a business interest on the part of the telecommunications companies to site them on existing poles. We would also put a preference in our ordinance for that same thing. So we'd be trying to steer into that direction. So to the extent there are poles, we wouldn't want new ones, and I don't think most telecommunications companies would either.
Because it's just easier and cheaper to use an existing pole.
Yeah.
So,
That was my question, do they need to make an agreement with JCP&L? Would that potentially not be easier for them than building their own pole?
It would be, and there are regulations that also address, federal regulations that address that and require the companies to
Okay.
cooperate, co-locate, in other words, they can't say, you're not coming on my pole, build your own. They're not allowed to do that
Okay.
unless it's not feasible.
so what is the council gonna be presented with next in terms of wanting to put approval together?
An ordinance for introduction. We could have another workshop if you want, but Tom and I are working on a detailed ordinance that we're gonna present to you. If you want that reviewed in detail in a workshop, we could do that. If you want to present it on introduction.
I don't know if that's necessary, Kevin, I'm just trying to, look, it's gonna go this way, and now the state has said, hey, you don't do anything, we're gonna do it anyway. So we'll put an ordinance together. But what is it that the council has to review in terms of acquiescence or permission for the carrier to do that? None, really. We have nothing to do with that.
If the ordinance is written that for the 5G, they can only use existing poles, then you don't have to do anything.
Well, we can't,
If you go into existing poles, period, and that's the end of it.
we can definitely say if there are, and we're going to say if there are existing poles that are available for their use, they have to use them, not build a new pole. But there may be circumstances where there are not existing poles. Tom laid out one, we have a new development where everything's underground. If there's not an existing pole, we can't deny them the right to build a pole if it has to be located in that location.
So to answer John's question
Okay.
as to what the council would need to approve, I think you said we would not need to approve the permit application, the professionals handle that, but we would need to approve a right-of-way agreement?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
that's why we're currently setting up. There are some towns that do not require a right-of-way agreement. I think, Tom, we think it's a better way to proceed, and that, because it's an agreement for use of property that's under the control of the borough, then that would require council approval.
Okay.
And I would recommend that.
Okay.
Well, essentially, we really don't have a choice. If
No.
you don't do anything, the state's gonna come in and do what they wanna do.
Yeah,
So,
it's just- To me, it's just these variables.
what we say in the old country, aquí sogat.
To me, it's just the variables.
Right, there's like small things we can do,
Yeah.
help the town.
Existing poles, they will.
Right.
You know, if there's a benefit in that, they don't want to spend any money.
Yeah. So to me, it's like we're going to preference to use the existing poles, setting the escrow fee and application fee such that it covers, or you're fairly comfortable that it covers all the costs of the borough, wouldn't have to incur any cost, right-of-way agreement. And then, this is my own personal opinion, I'd be interested in the council's take on notifying the residents if it was going to be in front of, a right-of-way in front of someone's home. Because me personally, I just think people will be like, what's going on, and have a whole bunch of questions. Noticing it and explaining it all
Right.
preemptively eliminates that.
I think, Mr. Neff, did you say 200 feet from where the pole would be?
200 feet is kind of a standard
I would go even
for
further, that's
development.
my feeling, to let as many people know. It's just, I'm just thinking, let's say my parents, they live in a small neighborhood, 7 homes, and 200 feet's not that far, but they can all see if there was a pole towards the end of the cul-de-sac or the beginning, and they would all be up in arms, like, why are they putting this here? So I think the more people we reach out to, might be better.
I'll just say 200 feet is the standard for any development, so say, like the Amazon that came in, you know, for anything that goes in like that, it's a 200-foot notification list is the standard. But I agree we should do it because I think it'll save the borough hassle and time too. This way, when the Verizon or whoever notifies the residents, they put their phone number on it.
Exactly.
So Verizon's getting the phone calls, not the borough.
And I'll look into whether or not we can expand that. The municipal land use law, which governs zoning applications, development applications, doesn't let you expand beyond 200 feet. In other words, an applicant only has to give within 200 feet by state law. If we can do more, I don't know if we can, but if we can, I'll look into that and see if we can expand that.
Okay, thanks.
I'll let you know.
Kevin, just curious, how did the airlines make out with challenging that 5G, you know?
Yeah, that's funny. There is some regulations, some court cases that have said when there are flights that go over a town on a regular basis, they've kind of put a hold on 5G while they determine whether or not there's some interference with the electronics on the plane. I haven't been following that. I just remember hearing about it, that is a concern if you're in a regular flight path.
Interesting. All right, and we need to do this soon, relatively soon, because it's in our best
Relatively
interest to
soon.
do it as
Yeah.
soon as possible. Okay. All right, so I guess just you'll when you have something drafted, you'll share it with the council, and
Yeah.
then we can
Tom
determine.
and I are-
Yeah,
we'll
the
work
council's
on it.
questions, I'm happy to do it.
I would say, hopefully within maybe 30 days, we'll have something to present for you to consider.
Okay, all right. We'll move on to the electronic, I keep on wanting to say electronic, EV, station ordinance. Tom, Mr.
All
Knight.
right. I think this one is a little simpler in my opinion. It doesn't really have as much of a direct impact on the borough. So this relates back to the governor's law that he put into effect on July 9th of 2021, which it's part of an overall program that he put out, but this one in particular is related to the electric vehicle charging stations and what they call the make-ready parking spaces. So the main purpose of this ordinance, the governor wanted to make it clear that these parking spaces need to be designated as a permitted accessory use, that it wouldn't trigger any sort of variances or formal site plan approval. They wanted to kind of make it as easy as possible for these to be installed, while still setting rules and regulations that they'd have to comply with. And again, it would be handled through something like a zoning permit instead of having to go to a formal planning or zoning board. So what this really does is, it modifies the existing land use ordinance to clearly indicate that these are permitted accessory use, and then it outlines the standards and requirements for what is required when they're installed, how many are required to be installed, and when they're required to be installed. So there's kind of a breakdown given. So it's really for new developments. There's no trigger for the borough to go put these charging stations in Borough Hall parking lot or Sycamore Park parking lot. I'm not aware of a requirement for existing commercial sites or existing townhouse communities to be putting them in. It's really for new developments. The next new warehouse application that we get in, or a retail site, or even a townhouse community perhaps, they would be required to install, starting with what they call the make-ready spaces. So what that means is they have to run the underground electric and conduit and the wires. That way, after a certain time period, they can then just go install the charging station, as opposed to having to dig up the parking lot or sidewalks to install it.
Does it affect plans that have been approved but haven't started yet?
No, so it's what's called the time of application rule, if I have that correct, right?
Yep.
So any application that is currently in front of the planning or zoning board would not have to comply with this. It's just once this ordinance becomes effective, whether it's 30, 60 days from now, whenever that is, any applications submitted after the effective date of the ordinance have to comply.
Tom, I thought that once the governor passed this, it was required, like statewide. Same thing, just like the FCC won't, I thought all the developments were required statewide.
So the state did put this out, you are correct, and then they really just gave the municipalities the opportunity to tweak it. So there are certain sections that we can't change, and there are a few sections that we could change. So I will have to
So if it's already in
double-
effect, then applications that are currently, for example, from the planning board.
Yeah, it's a unique situation because typically the state doesn't govern like this. The state doesn't set requirements like this.
Well,
I'm not, it's not even like it's a DEP sets stormwater rules and regulations. That's an established agency. And then they tell the town, you have to adopt an ordinance in compliance with our model ordinance. I've never seen a situation where the state has come down and said, this is now a requirement without the town first adopting it. So
Right.
I'm not sure if you have any.
You know what, I don't know the answer to that either. It's a good question, but,
well, for instance, Amazon now, they haven't started yet, but they're gonna have a huge parking lot. Will they be required to put the charging stations in?
They are not required by this because the ordinance wasn't in effect, whether you consider it,
Okay.
the January 1st date that the governor may have put in or the date we adopted. But just for your awareness, that they did think ahead. They are going to have some electric charging stations out there.
Yeah, I'm reading that somewhere.
Oh, so there's no minimum, is there a minimum number? There is.
It's not retroactive though. It's only moving forward for
Okay.
new applications.
Okay.
Yeah, so like
It was like 20%, what that was.
yeah,
Two
so
spaces or-
if it's a site plan like an Amazon, At least one, if there be 50 or fewer parking spaces, two, if it's 51 to 75, and it kind of goes up from there.
And this is uniform regardless whether it's commercial, residential, any type of
So
use?
those
Same.
numbers are for commercials,
different.
commercial sites. So residential, it starts if there's 5 or more units. So if you have a subdivision of single-family houses, 5 or more houses, it's required. If you have a condo or townhouse community or an apartment building, if there's 5 or more of those units, it's required. And then it starts, at least 15% of the required spaces must be make-ready. Yeah, and then, yes, 15% for residential.
Okay. I think, I attended the liaison to the Environmental Commission. There was a webinar from ANJAC, right, the New Jersey Association of Environmental Commissions, where they reviewed this, and that's where I'm gonna go reread it after the meeting, but I believe they said this is already in effect once that statewide ordinance went in place, but towns can tweak it.
Right.
But part of it was just awareness, because, unless, like, local planning boards may not know, right?
Yeah, and that's, so there's two things. Yeah, one, we wanted to tweak it a little bit, but also we wanted it in our ordinance, again, so everyone knows about it. Whether it's the applicant who's putting their package together, or on my end, us as the engineers reviewing it, or Jen Beam as the planner. If it's not in our ordinance, we've got to make sure we remember it. Normally, we just go through the ordinance line by line and make sure everything complies. So if it's not in our ordinance, it's much more difficult for everyone to be aware.
So what's going to happen to the applications after Jan 1, when this was in effect? Let's say the state's
Right.
Enforcing this, and the applications we already approved, let's say last week.
So again, it's not when the applications were approved or came before the board, it's when the application was submitted.
Okay.
So we would just have to check.
To make sure they
what
were submitted
applications,
pre-22.
the ones you're aware of have been submitted previously.
Okay.
We would just have to check with the board secretary about any ones that may be submitted between January 1st and,
So the implementation date statewide was January 1st, 2022?
I would have to, don't quote me on that one, I would have to
I thought it
double
was
check.
earlier.
Again, it's
Okay.
not the typical way, nothing's ever been done like this before from the
Okay.
state level.
Do we get points for this with Sustainable Jersey?
So that's a great question. So my understanding is if a town has already required it prior to the state law going in effect, then they would. Now that it's a state law, they may not unless we do something that's enhanced, but I would have to check on that. Sustainable hasn't, I don't know if they've come out on a rule on that,
Okay.
but we can check.
Just for awareness, some of the things that proposing to change from the model ordinance
Yeah.
was they had put requirements on the local police department to enforce this on private sites. I don't think that's something we want to do. I see some heads shaking no, so I'm going to agree with that. And then there were some requirements, for additional signage for these, throughout the parking lots, kind of wayfinding signage. Typically, we try to stay away from sign pollution. These are generally large enough where you can see them from a distance. They will have their own signs on the charging stations, which, if you go down to the outlet mall or other locations, you can generally see.
I bet
from.
it would even come up on your GPS.
Yeah, I
Correct.
was gonna
Most people who have not smart car, but an electric car, they know where these are. They have them in an app or a GPS, so I don't think we need to overcrowd.
Yeah, they covered that on the webinar. Like if you have an EV car, it'll tell you your next charging station is located here. Like this is your closest
Yep.
one, so they know.
It's going to be almost like in the northern part of the country. You have the block heaters that look like parking meters. So your block don't freeze, and you're going to park lot, you plug in.
Yep.
Yeah.
So this is ready, in my opinion, the draft. I've sent it out to council. If you have any, other formal questions, you can let me know. Otherwise, I think we can schedule it for introduction at the next council meeting on February 15th. It would then go to planning board because it's a land use ordinance. It would go to planning board for master plan consistency review. We could do that on February 23rd, and then potentially the public hearing and adoption at the March 1st council meeting.
Okay. Does any member of council have any other questions on this? Okay.
Can you put a charging station on a 5G pole?
Way to bring it all together.
Okay. Is there any member of the public that would like to comment on this? Okay. Hearing none. There's no executive session this evening, so this concludes today's business. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Thank you, Mr. Dahlgren. May I have a second?
Second.
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Manginelli. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
This meeting is now adjourned at 8:41 PM. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Big crowd. Big crowd.
This chair, I almost died.
We fixed it.